Just as we saw at the end of the First World War, we have a Red Scare under Woodrow Wilson. We're going to have another Red Scare after World War II under President Harry Truman. The first point you need to understand about this anti-communistic feeling after World War II is that it's bipartisan. It's not something that's unique to just Republicans or Democrats. Although the Republican Party certainly had a lot of payoffs when it comes to this, mainly because of the fact that the Republican Party was not in power during, in the 1930s and 40s, right? It was going to be the Democrats. So the Republicans could go about and talk about how Democrats were soft on communism. But as a matter of fact, it's going to be the Democrats, particularly Truman, that's going to take the first major steps in stirring up this internal fear of communists. In 1947, Truman is going to begin what's known as the loyalty check program. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to have people who want to apply for federal jobs, particularly those that are going to deal with state secrets, to actually go through a background check to see what groups what groups were you a part of? What was your background before you were applying for this job, right? It's kind of like today, for example, when school districts hire teachers, there's going to be people that are going to do background checks for these teachers, potential teachers, in order to figure out whether or not these guys are, pedophiles, right? It's just common sense. But nevertheless, this loyalty check program is going to basically create what's known as the Attorney General's list of subversive organizations, and it's got numerous types of organizations, and they're totalitarian. These organizations are totalitarian, fascist, communist, subversive, and other, as they call it, and if you were a member of these various associations, I mean, here's my copy of the list. I mean, it's just massive, right? It takes up almost 3 pages of notes. All right, I'm not going to read them all. That's that's for sure. But nevertheless, it's always fun to go look through them. Download them. I'm sure you can find them somewhere online. Download them and take a look at them, see what's going on. Some of them are obvious. Communist Party of the United States. Yeah, absolutely. And then of course, you got some people like the Ku Klux Klan and other various various organizations. And if you were a part of these organizations, you either had your security clearance revoked or you didn't get the job that you were applying to. All of this feeds into what we call the second Red Scare. And just like the first Red Scare, where we had to have a point person for it, the second Red Scare, same thing. We're going to have a point person for the second Red Scare, and his name was McCarthy, right? Joseph McCarthy was a senator from Wisconsin. He was nobody knew him. To be honest, and when he's running for re-election in 1952, he's going to have to make himself an issue to get him into the papers. But before we get into McCarthy, let's talk about the beating heart of this anti-communist crusade, the Second Red Scare. It's called the House Un-Americans Activities Committee, and basically it's a committee that's been around since in the 1930s, right? And nevertheless, they're going, one of the things that they're going to do is they're going to hold hearings, and they're going to listen to a man named Whittaker Chambers. And Chambers was an ex-communist. He was part of the party in the 1920s, but at some point had left it. And in fact, it was even the senior editor of Time magazine. But by 1948, he is going to start giving committees what committees want. What do committees want most of all, right? Names, right? They want, Whittaker Chambers is going to give names. The one name he really gets, and it's going to really become important, is going to be a man named Alger Hiss. Now, Alger Hiss worked in the government, but he was out of it by 1948. He was in the State Department. But Chambers said, this guy's a communist. In fact, he was my go-between to give documents to the Soviet government, right? And Hiss, of course, is going to deny it completely, right? He said that he was not a communist, nor did he ever meet Whittaker Chambers. And Hiss did such a great job that, in fact, it looked like HUAC was going to drop the charges. It made HUAC look bad. And that might have been the end of it. But for a man you've probably heard of, Richard Nixon. Nixon is basically going to say, you know what? You're lying. Now, this is very early Nixon. This is Nixon in his first term as a congressman from California. He had just won election in 1946. And Nixon says, Mr. Hiss, you are lying. And I don't know, maybe it takes one to know one. Who knows? But nevertheless, Nixon pushes the issue. So therefore, Chambers ups the charges. And not only does he say that Hiss was a communist, he was a communist spy who gave him classified information. And to prove it, he comes up with these classified documents. Now, despite the confidence that Chambers has of these charges, he provides no concrete evidence to support them. So in November of 1948, Chambers plays his trump card. He goes and delivers to his attorney 65 typed State Department documents he claimed that he received from Hiss. Chambers is going to allege that he received it from Hiss and that he was supposed to relay them to communist contacts. Several nights later, Chambers is actually going to go out to a pumpkin patch in a Maryland farmland, where he's going to produce out of a carcass of a hollowed out pumpkin 4 rolls of microfilm containing these secret documents. Now, I'm a city slicker, but I have definitely carved my fair share of pumpkins, and I know that if you take a pumpkin in particularly in Halloween, right? Well, Halloween time, and you carve it out into a jack-o'-lantern, it turns from a scary, spooky jack-o'-lantern to somebody needing dentures in about 2 weeks, if that, right? These documents are dated in 1938, which means this hollowed out pumpkin is a very special, magical, impressive pumpkin because it lasts 10 years hollowed out. That's what he wants us to believe, right? But nevertheless, these documents, as I said, published in 1938, written in 1938, but Chambers was already out of the Communist Party by then. But that's a detail, I guess, HUAC never really bothered about, right? But one of the things that these documents they're written on a typewriter. Now, I realize that typewriters aren't necessarily part of the American lexicon nowadays. I mean, to give you an idea of my age, I typed up my applications for college on a typewriter, right? They're kind of like computers, but without the screen, right? And you get your printer in front of it, And the one thing about a typewriter is this: each key, it has a unique fingerprint, just as unique as your fingerprint on your finger, right? Each keyboard, each typewriter has a unique fingerprint, which means that I could type up exactly the same document on one typewriter and do it on the other. And even though they say exactly the same thing, the formatting, the quotes, everything is exactly the same, they look different because of the fact they were typed on different typewriters. Well, what's going to happen is that HUAC is going to be going to go find a storage container, right? And there they're going to find this typewriter, and it is Alger Hiss's typewriter. They're going to find that smoking gun. So thus, despite the fact that Hiss was effectively denied the charges, they find this alleged smoking gun. Therefore, he's going to be put on trial for perjury. He's tried for the first time, and the jury is hung. But in 1950, he is actually found guilty of perjury. What about espionage? Was he convicted of espionage? The answer is no, he wasn't, mainly because of the fact that the statute of limitations had already expired. If you can commit a crime, and if enough time passes before you're prosecuted for that crime, you cannot be prosecuted. Now, there are some that doesn't apply to. Don't go kill somebody and then I just got to wait a couple of hours, we'll be fine. No, nothing like that. Espionage, however, does have that statute of limitations. But this case really just gins up more and more fear of the Second Red Scare, of the communists, and that is where Joseph McCarthy is going to come into our story big time.